Hey, hi everyone, and happy Labor Day. I'm Jamie Knatzer, Education Coordinator with Austin Tan Cerca de la Frontera. And thank you for coming today to learn more from our partners at the Comité Fronterizo de Obreras about women building power in the workplace and organizing for their rights in the maquiladoras on the Texas-Mexico border. The Comité Fronterizo de Obreras, or CFO, is based out of Piedras Negras, Mexico, and works to defend human rights, justice, and dignity in a harsh labor environment. Thank you to everyone who made this possible today. Our interpreters are ATCF board members, Susana Pimiento and Howard Hahi. And co-hosting the meeting and responding to questions in the chat are Ruthie Powers and Janet Cook. And our board chair, Josefina Castillo, is here to give a little more history on how ATCF was involved at the beginning of the GEMA project. GEMA stands for Gender and Empowerment of Women Towards Action. And this CFO project is one of the main topics of our webinar today. Austin Tan Cerca formed over 20 years ago as a project of the American Friends Service Committee. We coordinate unique educational opportunities to raise awareness about social and economic injustices along the Texas-Mexico border and throughout the world. We also host an event called the Women and Fair Trade Festival. So mark your calendars. It will take place on Saturday, November 20th this year with fair trade vendors from women's cooperatives around the world. And we hope to see you there. Again, that's Saturday, November 20th. We do rely on individual donations and small grants to support this work. So if you're able, please donate to help with the cost of the webinar and future educational programming. And I'll go ahead and put this link in the chat. And so today we have 4 amazing presenters. We're honored to have Monica Teresa Ortiz, a poet born and raised in Texas, with a poetry reading. Then we'll have 3 members of the CFO joining us from Mexico to share more about their work on the GEMA project. The first will be Angelica Hernandez Mendoza, a social worker and daughter of a former maquiladora worker. Presently, she is responsible for CFO projects related to gender equity and women's empowerment. Angelica actively participates in national and international networks as a defender of labor rights. Second, we'll have Julia Quiñones Amparan. Julia has been an outreach organizer for almost 20 years with the Comité Fronterizo de Obreras. She has represented Mexican maquiladora workers in the Copenhagen Social Summit, as well as the Beijing Women's Conference. Julia has built alliances with international trade unions, and her efforts have been featured in publications by many independent outlets, as well as Business Week and the New York Times. Julia is a mother of 4, including twins. Lorraine Kluwer will be our third speaker. Lorraine currently serves as CFO specialist in gender and transformative empowerment. In this role, she develops self-care and collective well-being programs for CFO's team of project leaders and workers' rights defenders. Lorraine helped develop the GEMA curriculum and implement the first 2 generations of GEMA trainings with the CFO. And in addition to her work with the CFO, she's a research consultant for the Maquila Solidarity Network and offers integrated therapeutic accompaniment to individuals and groups who have survived adversity or are seeking healing, growth, and transformation. Full bios for the presenters can be found on the ATCF website, in our events section, or on the Facebook event page. Around 1 p.m., we'll start the question and answer session, which will go till 1:30 p.m. And during the Q&A, the way it will work, you'll type your question into the chat and choose a specific presenter to direct the question to. And then I'll read your question out loud so that it can be interpreted and also directed to the correct person. And the webinar today will be recorded in both English and Spanish. And so please make sure to keep your microphone on mute, and that way we can avoid background noise during the event. So now I'll turn it over to ATCF Board Chair, Josefina Castillo, and she'll give a little more history on how ATCF was involved in the initial stages of GEMA. And her part will be in English and then in Spanish, so the interpretation will be paused for this part. Thank you. Josefina, it looks like you're on mute.
Sorry. I'll start again. I'm honored and very happy to be here with you today. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm now in Mexico City, my hometown, visiting with my family, but I live in Austin, Texas. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of Austin tan cerca de la frontera, which was, as Jamie has said, a project initially of the American Friends Service Committee. So we have been participants in the launching of the GEMA project. The GEMA project, as you will later hear, stands for Gender and Empowerment of Women into Action. We started it, a group of people, of course, in the premises of the Comité Fronterizo de Obreras about 7 years ago, and it was we also participated as Austin tan cerca in subsequent trainings of the first generation that took the trainings. The first generation, of course, of maquiladora workers, and including Monica Ortiz, who is here today with us. I'm very happy to see her, and she will offer some of her poetry, which is precisely her background as an artist, and that's the way that she participated with GEMA 7 years ago. She started going with a team of people from Austin tan cerca de la frontera to the CFO trainings, and they participated as a team, and she participated as one of the poetry writing as part of the training itself. There were other people also from Austin tan cerca who went, and they helped with the notes, they took photographs, and they participated in sociodramas as well. So it's an honor for us to listen to how GEMA developed, and now after 6 or 7 years is a part of a broader project with local Mexican networks. Now I'll speak in Spanish. Ahora lo diré en español. Pues estoy muy honrada de estar con ustedes. Ahora estoy en la Ciudad de México, que es mi lugar de nacimiento, y estoy con mi familia. Estoy muy contenta de estar con todos los míos, ¿verdad? Y voy a hablar un poquito sobre cómo surgió el proyecto de GEMA y Empoderamiento de la Mujer hacia la Acción. Nosotros participamos en el lanzamiento del programa hace 6 o 7 años y continuamos participando también en el programa de entrenamiento en sí mismo, incluyendo un grupo de personas de Austin tan cerca, ellas jóvenes, que fueron a participar también como entrenadoras. Entre ellas está Mónica Teresa Ortiz, que ahora estamos muy contentas de tenerla con nosotros y nos va a dar algo de su poesía, que era lo que ella, parte del entrenamiento que ella daba en los entrenamientos de GEMA. Otras personas también tomaron parte en esos talleres. Por ejemplo, ayudaron con las minutas de los talleres, tomando fotografías o igualmente tomando video. Y entonces es un placer ahora y un honor escuchar a las compañeras de cómo es que GEMA ha continuado en su desarrollo y a la fecha forma parte de un proyecto a nivel nacional junto con otras redes locales en México. Entonces es un honor tenerlas aquí y vamos a escuchar un poquito a las compañeras. Le cedo la palabra a Jamie para que ella continúe la presentación de Mónica. Gracias.
Thank you, Josefina. Next, we have Monica Teresa Ortiz with a poetry reading. Monica, thank you so much for coming.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's good to see everyone. It's been a long time, even if we're just, here virtually together. It's it's nice to be reunited. And being a part of GEMA was an incredibly transformative experience. And so I'm really, happy and excited to see the project grow, and to see, the ways that it continues to be a very special, a very special project that I hope, continues its success. So I'm really happy just, to be a part of all of this and to be back with all of y'all. So thank you for inviting me. I have a short reading for today, I guess. I've spent the last, I guess it's been a year and a half now, since the pandemic began. And so I've just been writing here and there. So this is one of the pieces that I've written in the last year and a half. I wonder if this finally will be the year my hair will turn white. A woman sings a funeral song I watch through Zoom. I ask if I can skip the burial. I hate goodbyes with my camera on. I could not remember anything in December through February, except the virus infected my house. We don't know how it arrived, but we contained it to a person, to a room, and managed to survive what more than 600,000 did not. I hear the crows calling, but I imagine that they are mockingbirds. The days become stones in a river, splitting the directions of flow. I turned 40 in February and forgot about poems. Sometimes there is an absence of grief, a trench in how I am feeling. Then other moments, I peer into water, looking for the 95% of the ocean that is alienated. Will I find disappeared populations there in the depths? Do I dare dream of dragging the bottom in search of an entrance to the underworld? My heart lives inside the sea, and at night, water soaks my dreams. Waves rock against my feet. I crave nebulous pleasure from the stars and pray to the cosmos. Through the cold days, I never forgot that splendor. Perhaps oceans are stirred into motion by our singing. I don't want to wait for our lives to be over. I want to know right now, what will it be? It being that we met under collapsing universes, ones where we purchased air purifiers and ultraviolet lamps to filter faith, not just what we breathed. While we cared for our pods and imagined holding hands, in the realm where we slept, in a state where fear isn't a possibility. And us, vulnerable and intimate, not just a digital record, and us that no matter the economy, despite extraction, know that hope is actually an NFT and Tentacle life survives. We aren't bound to blockchains, but to dreams, to freedom, to each other, and to liberation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. That was beautiful and moving. Okay. So next we'll have our first presenter from the CFO. And it will be Angelica Hernandez Mendoza. So Angelica, take it away.
Pues muchísimas gracias a Austin, tan cerca de la frontera, por esta enorme
Thank you so
invitación.
much to Austin, tan cerca de la frontera, for this wonderful invitation, and good afternoon to everyone attending. It is truly an honor to be part of these projects that cultivate gender equity and empowerment of the working class. In the CFO, we have an empowerment project that it is called a GEMA, and it's an acronym that stands for Gender and Women's Empowerment for Action. But a gem, it's also a mineral which goes through a process of conversion to become a precious stone of great value. And those of us who participate in these educational processes are in this process of conversion as well. The project is made up of 7 modules with a total of 51 empowerment sessions. Each session has a different number of hours of duration, as well as specific objectives to achieve through the methodology of participatory education. As an example, I can mention some of them. Our initial session on the construction of the social construction of gender. We have a session of how to understand power, the role of education in social change, leadership, understand how we adults learn, etc. GEMA was implemented in Argelia for the first time. And then we at the CFO obtained a version that was translated into Spanish. And we appropriated the exercise. We are the only organization in Mexico that has this project, and that has been designed exclusively for women that work in the maquiladoras. Although this exercise can also be modified or adjusted according to the context, to be developed either in small or large groups through workshops. As it was mentioned before, there is a first generation of GEMA which graduated in 2014, and Austin Tan Cerca participated designing and implementing creative expression exercises. And they also gave support with the visual and audio recording of all the modules of the project. In this first generation, women from different cities, and from different maquila cities and cities participated. The second generation is the more recent, took place in 2019, and it was a shorter version of this project. that lasted for 4 months, and we integrated women also from different cities, from different maquila. And while these these uh, workers continue practicing and but especially reproducing the practices as defenders. Currently, due to the pandemic, we have not carried out workshops, but what we are doing at our best of our capabilities is to continue to implementing these exercises in small groups, 3 or 5 people, or individually. And we're also exploring the possibility to implement this virtually. That way we can reach workers that that wish to continue getting this training. And of course, we continue practicing these exercises and also getting training in our work. The CFO's work, and Julia will be working to be talking about that, is the labor laws, labor rights. But we also have this training in empowerment that women have access to, and we can also be implemented in this small group. So this project is complements the main uh, the main work of the CFO, that has tools for empowerment with a gender differentiated perspective. The women who have graduated from GEMA and who are currently learning about the project uh, are women that have undertaken uh, main changes both in their personal and their professional life. They are learning continuously learning. They are taking control of their lives. They are reflecting on what's best for for themselves, and especially they are in action. They are women that seek to organize with other women, and the way how they are acting and is strategic and also peaceful within the factories and also within different structures. Uh, GEMA is a space where we can find our strength, acquire new knowledge, and develop skills. We can also practice active listening. We develop creativity and effective techniques to improve our emotional intelligence, and other tools such as uh, other tools for organizing are required for women that are part of these organizations. Empowering women is empowering the whole community, is creating social awareness of the different problems that take place, and especially how we can take responsibility for the changes. It's a slow process, but it is also the most effective that generates improvements in our society. We believe in the methodology, and at the CFO, we know that it is important to implement popular education in our communities to initiate changes in society, and this way to build a movement of equality and democracy. The scopes at the personal or collective level are unlimited. There is there is not a limit of what we can achieve. We're always in this learning. It's always analyzing, taking action. So it's in constant movement. Today, I think that humanity needs confidence in itself and in others to grow in healthier and safer environments. At the CFO, we achieve this by educating and empowering women. There are some people who will say there are today today there are too many laws that protect women. They have many advantages, and there are many people in favor. What are women are going to do with all this strength that is surrounding them? What I can say about this is that we women, we are educating ourselves, we are informing ourselves, we're united, we're taking control of difficult situations. And women, we are everywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelica. Okay. Next, we have Julia Quiñones, coordinator of the CFO. Julia.
FO, Julia. Well, very many thanks to everyone, to all the people who have connected here. Austin, Tan Cerca de la Frontera, I'm very happy that most of the board of directors is here, and I'm very happy. So to continue with what my compañera Angie was saying, you know, women are everywhere. That's why when women empower ourselves, when women organize ourselves and take care of our health, we are contributing to the improvement of the lives of our children, our family, our coworkers, and our communities. We're doing something for our children because the same way that we're taking care of ourselves, we're taking care of our children, we're taking care of our family, we're taking care of our workers and our communities and the organization and at our work. And we're impacting the communities from which we come. So the overall goal of the CFO is to improve the working and living conditions of the working class in the maquiladores, something that should be a natural human right. As Angie says, it should be something simple, but it's taken the CFO more than 50 years of struggle, more than 40 years of struggle. And now I know we got some photos. So because sometimes images speak more than words, I'm going to comment a few things here, but principally, I'd like to talk about the context that we're living through after this pandemic. As Monica was saying in her poem, after so many human loss, we have entered in a kind of a comfortable state. It looks like most of the workers, men and women in the maquilas, are now vaccinated, but so they've let their guard down a little bit. And so they're not following the protocols, you know, about distancing. And in fact, we've heard over the weekend that the women workers who you know, waste their, you know, their PPE, it's sold to them by the company. So this is a violation of the most fundamental rights, where the companies don't do the minimal to help people. So there was our people under 18 years. 2 weeks ago, we met a worker who was infected and was sent to quarantine for 2 weeks. She received no salary or disability from the Social Security. She has 5 children. And in 3 weeks, not the company nor Social Security paid her capacity, and she for 3 weeks didn't receive salary. And she's a mother, a single mother, who is in charge of 5 kids. So, and then we see with sadness that the maquiladores, even the supervisors and the bosses, you know, the administration, everyone can be infected because they're not really taking the right measures. So there are also cases of discrimination, people who are overweight, simply because some businesses don't hire them. And somewhere they're already working, they're making agreements where so they have to go to a nutritionist and they have to lose weight. This is, of course, completely impossible because of the low salaries. They can't pay the appointments with the nutritionist, and of course not to be able to buy all the food that's special that they need to have a balanced diet. So when we talk about rights, for example, uh, now with the labor reforms and the new USMCA reform, the new replacement for NAFTA between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. This is and it's the labor chapter. So there's a section about respect for individual rights, gender rights, and collective rights. So one of the principal rights that they mentioned is that we recognize discrimination in work as a violation of the treaty. There shouldn't be any type of discrimination, not through pregnancy, reasons of sex, sexual orientation, race, religion, uh, or you know, questions of obesity or age. Or also, the new reforms establish as a violation of the treaty harassment and sexual harassment in the workplace. And now it's an obligation to establish a protocol between the contract and workers to prevent discrimination based on gender. And it's an obligation that there be a protocol how to prevent violence and discrimination and sexual abuse. And also prohibited to require the presentation of medical certificates of non-pregnancy for admission and for keeping employment, and it's also prohibited to fire people for being pregnant or for the care of children. So this really, really bothers me a lot talking about this. It's already in the law that examens are prohibited for pregnancy. And this weekend, a worker told me that they still are doing tests for pregnancy, and even the nurses go with the workers to the bathroom to be sure that the urine sample, you know, corresponds to the worker. And so we have two messages because on one side there's a reform, but on the other side, in the practice, we see that they're being violated constantly with their rights. And so we also see that the workers who are employees of the places, it's an obligation of the bosses to put them into Social Security and get the medical attention for them and collective rights. It's very exciting to hear that there's in the all unions have to be ratified, and there has to be a ratification through a vote. It's democratic, and it's free and direct and secret. And also, it says that the unions have to be in agreement with gender equality. So principally, those who are organized, you know, the women, but now it's an obligation for the unions that they have to be do processes of renovation or renewal of contracts. And if a company is principally women, then in the election of the board, there should be equity, and it should be based on gender. And so that on one side opens up more opportunities for women, so that it's not just men who take these union positions. And we also extend these reforms to within the unions. We avoid discrimination and violence and sexual harassment against women because most of the labor unions are formed with men. These are very well known things that happen. It happens very general. fashion. So now the courts or the boards for conciliation are going to disappear, and instead they're going to give way to something called the Federal Central for Conciliation and Labor Registration. And that's going to substitute for the conciliation boards. They're going to be very selective in the selection of personnel, and that they should be hired with a perspective on gender and a focus on human rights. And they say that the new federal registration centers will have to be established on the principles. These new centers are going to be driven by legality, impartiality, equality, trustworthiness, efficiency, objectivity, professionalism, transparency, and publicity. If we have some new centers with all these principles, we could guarantee that the rights of the women and men workers are going to be respected. Also, part with what we had before, if we had any kind of suits for sexual harassment or violence, but now it was very difficult to prove. But now they're going to say that these centers will have to listen to the victim completely to make a space that's safe, and it's not going to be possible to have the aggressor and the victim confront each other or face each other. So it'll be a confidential process. And all of this is happening. And I'll tell you that all the feelings we've found, because on one side, we got the reforms, but on the other, we've got the working women who don't believe because so many years have gone by. There have been so many violations. And so it's a part of our work to document all these situations. So, the organization can, be strengthened. And we hope that things change. And because now this new treaty is weak for it to enforce it, but we've got our little grain of sand, and the CFO has pushed and documented the inconsistencies, and so I believe we have influenced so that this new treaty and the reforms can be favorable to the workers. But to go into all this work on one side, we have all the need for reforms. And then on the other side, all the problems with the pandemic, and we haven't been able to get together in the same way. So we're also taking care of ourselves because, as Angie says, we have to take care of our own health. And since last year, we've started projects of self-care. And so we, as women and us, activists, have to be very, very strong, take care of our own health, to be able to take care of our own coworkers. And they also have to take care of themselves because, as they say, we can't give what we don't have. And so we're asking that the workers avoid violence. Um, and so I think that they should have their rights so that the workers should be okay in all aspects of their life. I think I'm a little bit over time here. So I think something I'd like to add uh, in a very special moment. The organization
con quien hemos desarrollado pues un sinnúmero de proyectos de dotar a trabajadoras de equipos telefónicos, ¿verdad? De equipos celulares. Ahora con la pandemia las compañeras no tenían manera de comunicarse. Parte de nuestro apoyo a ellas fue
So part of the work was giving them cell phones and help them to download apps so they could be first in touch with their family, but also they would be able to help other fellow workers, and also to support the schooling of their children. And when things seemed that they were going, that were collapsing, we have been undertaking a very important project with Canadian and US organizations interested in monitoring that the labor reforms are implemented, as well as the gender reforms. So this is our speciality from the CFO. As Angie was mentioning, we have a special methodology, and we have also the capability to support the women workers so they can submit proposals to improve and to really elaborate protocols that really are useful for them, that are respected by the companies. While our organization, after being a small organization, now we are participating in the creation of manuals and policies. We are undergoing the transition from a small company to a medium-sized organization with a larger organization, with a structure to face the challenges that are upcoming. And for this work, it's very important having the support of Austin Tan Cerca de la Frontera and from all our friends from abroad. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. We appreciate you being here. All right, so next we have Lorraine Kluwer, CFO's Specialist in Gender and Transformative Empowerment. Lorraine?
Thank you, Jamie. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to see so many people present at this event, and happy Labor Day to you if you're in the US. So yeah, taking up from where my sisters, Angie and Julia, left off, I wanted to contextualize a little all of the amazing work that they have been doing to empower women workers over the years and over the decades. Julia has already alluded to significant changes in the normative framework in Mexico that have very gender-specific rules and regulations in them. Primarily the Ley Federal de Trabajo, or the federal labor law, which was reformed in 2019. But also it's probably worth mentioning the new free trade agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada, the USMCA, or TEMEC, as it's known in Mexico, also has some very important gender conditionality built into it. And by that, I mean, there's a framework to put more pressure onto employers, unions, and the government in the three countries to respect women's workers' rights and to approach women's worker rights from a gender perspective. Okay, so the new labor law and well, the reformed labor law and the free trade agreement both have as a grounding principle the concept of substantive equity. And that means that there's a recognition that you don't get equality between the genders just by saying that women should have equal access to rights as men. There's a recognition that centuries of discrimination and unequal power between men and women mean that you have to be much more proactive than just saying that women should have access to the same rights as men. You have to incorporate specifically gendered protections into the law, and also the use of temporary measures such as quotas based on gender to positively encourage and support women as they become leaders in the union movement, as they become entrepreneurs, that's sort of like the business side of things in the free trade agreement, and as they become workers in the formal sector, because in Mexico 56% of women who work they're not in the formal sector, and that means that they don't have access to legal protections, they don't have access to social security benefits, for example. So there's all sorts of proactive measures that are being put into place now to support women workers in these different ways. And I think it's really important to highlight here that none of these changes would have happened either in the federal labor law or in the free trade agreement if it wasn't due to the decades of activism and strategic solidarity work that groups like CFO have been doing. Okay, so this is kind of, we're reaping the fruits, some of the fruits of the decades of activism right now. Although, as both Julia and Angelica have said, there's still so much work to be done. So I'm going to try not to repeat anything that's already been said. But I think it might be worthwhile sort of offering some data to contextualize the work that the GEMA program is happening in. So, for example, women workers in Mexico, and this is not unique to Mexico, you know, this is global, right? But Mexico has its specific conditions. Women work more hours, are paid less per hour, have less access to benefits, for example, healthcare and retirement, and therefore earn less over their entire lifetimes than men. And at the same time, on top of that, they're doing much more unpaid work in the home and in the community than men do. And that means that they have less free time than men do for their self-care, self-development and leisure, and for investing in further education and what have you than men do. So a couple of statistics here that you might find interesting. For example, on average, according to official figures in Mexico from the National Institute for Statistics, women are earning 4,200 pesos per month, whilst men are earning 5,300 pesos a month. And both of those earnings are pretty much poverty salary levels. But women workers are much more vulnerable and are much closer to the survival line than men are. Women on average, again, so it's hard to generalize, but these are generalized figures for the whole country. Women are doing on average 56 hours a week of unpaid labor in the home, whilst men are doing 37 hours per week of unpaid labor in the home. So across Latin America, the gender gap in wages is pretty dire in Mexico. It's one of the largest gender gaps. In terms of work-life balance, only Colombia is worse than Mexico for women. And all of this means that women have much fewer opportunities to participate in the formal labor force. They're just much less able. Sorry? Oh, sorry, I think I had a bit of interference there. I hope everyone can hear me. So this sort of skewed, unfavorable situation for women in the labor force accumulates over the lifetime. If we're working for 30, 40 years of our lives, by the time we get to retirement, women's economic situation is much worse than men's. I think it might be worth mentioning too that in both the labor law reform and Mexico's most recent constitutional reform, and in the free trade agreement with the US and Canada, we're not just looking at this sort of like binary distinction between men and women. The free trade agreement actually is the first major free trade agreement in the world to recognize the specific rights and the need for positive promotion of those rights for workers who identify as LGBTQT+. So there's a real understanding there too, that in the sort of intersectionality of discrimination, that people who identify with non-majority genders and sexualities are also, even more than women as a bloc, are even more discriminated against in the labor market, and that there's a need to deal with that too. So how is this, how does this stay? How does this situation remain in place? How has it remained in place for so long? And what are some of the very specific issues that as organizers and educators and as allies we have to deal with in order to break down these obstacles? One of them is gender-based violence, okay? And gender-based violence is quite a broad term. Violence can include economic violence, psychological violence, physical violence, and gender can also sort of, in the way that it's being looked at in the Ley Federal de Trabajo, the labor law, and in the free trade agreement, is sort of gender identity and sexual orientation. And both the labor law, the newly reformed labor law, and the free trade agreement are trying to very specifically not just outlaw, but also on the ground and in the factories, sanction and ultimately eradicate gender-based violence. And the GEMA program is adapting to those new needs and that new legal framework in order to do more outreach and education and organizing around gender-based violence and trying to eradicate it. One of the things that now is enshrined in the labor law in Mexico, for example, and Julia touched on this, is that employers, together with workers, whether workers are organized in unions or not, will have to sit down and dialogue and negotiate with workers to come up with a series of workplace-based protocols to deal with gender-based violence. And so CFO is looking for and already has opportunities to work on developing these protocols with workers and empowering workers to then negotiate with their employers to make sure that the protocols are for real and they're not just giving lip service to the law and to the free trade agreement. Something else that is very important that Julia also touched upon is that unions themselves are going to have to, by law now, ensure and demonstrate that their leadership structures reflect gender parity. So let's say you have 60% of your members are women, you're going to have to demonstrate to the Labour Secretariat, the Labour Department, that 60% of your leadership is female. And that is going to be no short order, as they say, for unions, because sadly in Mexico, unions are kind of considered to be the last kind of bastion, as it were, of patriarchal male domination. I mean, political parties over the last decade have been quite good in diversifying their leadership. And sadly, unions haven't. I mean, some unions are doing that and are making strides, but over the board and across the country throughout all sectors, unions are very male dominated still in Mexico. And it's curious because actually more women than men are union members in Mexico, but only 8% of general secretaries or presidents are women. And most collective bargaining agreements are signed by men and negotiated by men. And so what that tends to lead to is that in the collective bargaining agreements, there's zero mention of parental leave, leave for care in the home of elderly relatives or of children, and other women's priorities are just invisibilized and they haven't been negotiated in collective bargaining agreements. So that's another large area of work there for CFO and our allies.
Lorraine, you have about 1 minute to wrap it up.
Okay. So yeah, there's not much I wanted to say actually to wrap it up. I think it's really important to say that at this point in time, finally in 2021, there's recognition, not just from the grassroots, but also from sort of like the global mainstream institutional kind of environment. There's very strong recognition that if you don't proactively advocate for and create mechanisms for women to gain more access to their rights in the workplace, all the work being done in general to improve workers' rights isn't going to work, because you really have to bring women along, and you have to have women in leadership positions at the factory level and at the national level in unions to make real progress. So this is a very exciting time. We're hoping that through CFO's work, we can build and accompany and empower women as they struggle to become more organized, to develop their own leadership, and to put their issues on the negotiating table, both with their employers, with their male-dominated unions, and with the government. And we thank everybody for all of their support, their solidarity, and look forward to strategizing with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. We appreciate it. All right. So this part is about 30 minutes of question and answers. So if you did have a question pop into your mind during the presentation, you'll just type it here in the chat. So, and you'll direct it to one specific person. So we had Monica at the beginning, and then we had Angelica, then we had Julia, and then we had Lorraine. And so y'all are welcome to go ahead and think about your questions, type them in the chat, and direct it to one specific person. So I'll wait a minute for people to get their questions together and submit them. And I'll go ahead and read them out loud once we have one. Okay. And so you're welcome to write your question in Spanish if you wish. So I had a question pop up when Angelica was talking. Angelica, you did you say that the GEMA curriculum was first implemented in Nigeria?
Este proyecto se implementó como primera vez en Argelia. Oh, es que tu pregunta es que si los 7 módulos se implementaron primera vez.
So your question is where were the 7 modules first implemented?
Yeah.
It wasn't 7 modules. It was a project. It was in Algeria.
Oh, Algeria.
It was the first time it was in Algeria, and then in CFO we had a version that was translated to Spanish, from which we made a selection of exercises that were the most adequate for implementing. And those exercises were designed by us. We made some adjustments to the context of the different cities, and that were exclusive to the women in the maquiladoras.
Okay, thank you. All right, so our first question is, Julia, I wonder what some victories have been in getting provisions of the labor law enforced. Okay, Julia, that question was directed at you. What are some of the victories in getting provisions of the labor law enforced?
No entiendo la pregunta, pero
I don't understand the question. Can you please repeat it, Howard?
Yes. What are some of the victories?
Historias.
So, some stories.
The victories of getting provisions of the labor law enforced. So the victories in enforcement.
Throughout the years, we've been organizing the workers, and now with the recent reforms, what we're doing, what's most important for us is take all this information about the reforms and get them out to our base, and it's educating them. And so if the workers don't know about the reforms, even if there are really good laws, it would be a dead letter because they're not going to be able to do it. And so what we have done, there's a lot of stories about this. We've documented a lot of cases of violations of violence, of discrimination, and we've taken those complaints to the international tribunals and then to the office of the women's juridical position, and we've taken it to the workers' office, and there have been changes. We've had changes to eliminate cases such as discrimination and sexual harassment. These are partial cases, but at their moment, there have been some successes that some women workers have been able to enjoy.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so our next question, I'm going to direct to Angelica. Do the participants in a GEMA workshop engage in role play about the problems in the maquiladoras?
Sí, claro.
Yes, of course. There are different kinds of exercises which have the objective of analyzing the problems, and as part of the methodology to do a role play or social drama, as we call them, specifically to involve that part of the learning that we adult people have, that we're not just talking and interacting about how to solve all problems, but to do this practice in situations with real problems, and something we keep analyzing constantly in the CFO.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to direct this question to Julia. Okay, can someone comment on any work done with women and children crossing the border, especially those who have been sent back to Mexico? And so I'll direct that to Julia.
¿Que les han devuelto a México?
that have been returned to Mexico?
Yes.
I'm not really hearing well. Excuse me, Howard.
Okay, I'll repeat the question. Can you comment on work done with women and children crossing the border, especially those who have been sent back to Mexico?
Pues,
Oh, okay. Well,
quisiera que nos alcanzara la vida para poder apoyar esta
we would hope to have enough bandwidth to be able to help these people, but really the migration has really grown a lot here on the border, and a lot of the immigrants who are coming from the center of the country here to the border, and so those who come to try to go across to the United States, but also the ones who get deported. So as an organization, we do very little. Really, it's not a project that we're working on, but we've supported in some cases to women workers who've been able to communicate with their families in their countries of origin. We've documented, violations on part of the Mexican police, but we haven't done a lot. We don't have a specific process to support these people.
Okay, thank you, Julia.
Bueno, gracias, Julia.
Okay, the next question is for Lorraine.
Bueno,
I do know that labor unions are different in Mexico in many ways. And of course, women's leadership is only now emerging strongly in the US. But my out-of-date experience with Oaxacan teachers, Guanajuato social workers, and some of UE's cross-border work that has been that unions have been a strong, united voice at times, especially given the new requirements on women's leadership in unions. Is the CFO thinking about working in alliance with labor unions for women's rights in the future?
Hi, that's an excellent question. Thank you for that. And the answer is yes, absolutely. And we are already and have quite a history of working with unions, both on gender-specific programming and women's leadership development, and more generally on all workers' rights. Going back a few years, but not too many, CFO worked in very strong partnership with the Mine Workers Union in Mexico and the United Steelworkers in the US and Canada to develop the first ever curriculum for the mine workers here. It was called Mineras de Acero, or Mine Workers of Steel, to build women's leadership within the Mine Workers Union, and at every level, at the level of mines and at the level of regions and the whole country. And today there's a woman on the National Executive Committee in the Mine Workers Union, thanks to that work in part. Currently CFO is involved in a program supported by the Canadian government and Canadian unions to work in alliance with the FAT, the Federación Auténtico de Trabajadoras in Mexico, and with a federation called FECIAN, which brings together independent unions in the auto sector. So CFO has a key role there. And yeah, for sure, there are going to be lots more opportunities to be built and made to be making sure that unions in different sectors are figuring out how to get more women, not just into the leadership, but also into the rank and file, into their membership, because many of the strategic sectors don't yet have a strong women's membership base. I mean, the unions you mentioned, the education sector does, because it's a very female predominant sector, and historically they do have a lot of women and a lot of women's activism there, but in the private sector, not so much. So there's lots of opportunity there. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lorraine. Okay, one more
¿Puedo
question.
complementar un poquito sobre esa
Sure,
pregunta?
go ahead. Sure.
También,
Can I say something else? Beyond, aside from these alliances, the CFO has also played a leadership role in a national network. We are in 4 states: Jalisco, Aguascalientes, Morelos, Coahuila, and Tamaulipas. In these states, we have some organizations that are also partners working, and within their work plans, they are considering as well that CFO support in the implementation of the gender program and bring GEMA to these states. We don't have a concrete program, but there is a possibility that we can share the methodology with them.
Okay, thank you, Julia. All right, so one more question. Julia, you spoke of new labor reform centers. Are these federal agencies with real power to respond to problems? Do they operate together with enforcement of la Ley Federal de Trabajo? Or are they more a situation where the government gets to look good, like it is doing something on behalf of labor?
no, yo creo que hay una,
No, I think there is a serious attempt to achieve a change. So those new centers really get rid of the things that haven't worked, and these new centers of labor registry work in benefit to the workers, and their success will depend in the organizations, the oversight of documenting cases. But yes, we are hopeful that the labor centers will work, because that's what the government is trying to do. The current political situation for Mexico and the US, because of the free trade agreement, there is a consciousness in both countries to an attempt to change the conditions for the women and men workers.
Okay, and then a follow-up question is, where are the centers?
los centros van a estar en
The
todo.
centers will be located throughout the country, but we are now in the implementation stage, and the Mexican government didn't want to implement them all at once, rather by stages. Currently, they are starting in 7 states. Coahuila will be the last state. We expect that in May 22, the register of labor center will be installed in Coahuila, and then it will go to the municipalities. So that will give us time to advance. So the fact that it's not yet in place doesn't impede that the reforms have been approved and they have to be implemented, the labor reforms.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so I don't see any other questions or comments. There's still time to submit one, but for now, I'll turn it over to our board chair, Josefina Castillo, for a couple of short announcements before we end. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Again, I'd like just to mention that since Austin tan cerca de la frontera is not able to organize our usual delegation to the border due to both the COVID-19 and also because the borders are still closed. So we have decided to go on with webinars like this, and perhaps in the future we would organize a virtual delegation. And that's a question that I put forth to Julia and Angelica and Lorraine. How about doing a virtual delegation if we don't see any possibility of open borders at this time? And also, I want to take this opportunity to remind everybody that we are a very low budget organization and that we depend on the contributions of people like you who have always supported us, and through us we're supporting the CFO. So I'd like to make an offer for everybody to, if they are in possibilities of supporting us, to send a check to our office or to pay through our PayPal account, so that we are able to continue organizing this, because even though this is not a physical delegation or a physical meeting, we always need money to continue working towards making justice at the border. So I'd like just to remind everybody, if you continue supporting us, I know that you have always been close supporters, but if you can tell others to also join us in this Solidarity Act, we would very much appreciate it. Has this been interpreted? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, and I'll just read a couple of things that came up in the chat. Will those be attending receiving information, or will those attending be receiving information on a possible virtual border delegation? And all of our announcements go out through the newsletter and on social media. So you're welcome to send me your email or just put your email in the chat and I'll definitely get it into our mailing list. And we also had another comment. Monica, your poem was very moving. So I wanted to make sure that was read aloud. And then also another comment, yes, beautiful and moving poem, Monica. And another comment to Monica. Thank you so much for your beautiful poem. Thank you to the interpreters. Might we publish your poem on the website of Women on the Border? And I'll connect Elvia with Monica later to work that out. And I think that's the end of those comments. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. And we really appreciate your presence. And thank you to all the volunteers who are helping us with all the technical aspects. And thank you to the presenters for coming. So I hope y'all have a happy Labor Day. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Adios.